A children's home disappeared in 1990. 25 years later, police found a hidden nursery behind a wall. The photograph sits in a dusty file cabinet at the Millbrook County Records Office, forgotten among hundreds of similar images from institutions that no longer exist. But this one is different. This one holds secrets that would remain buried for 25 years. In the picture, taken on a crisp October morning in 1990, 23 children stand in 3 neat rows in front of the red brick facade of Willow Creek Children's Home. Their faces beam with the kind of manufactured joy that comes from being told to smile for the camera one too many times. Staff members flank them on both sides. Mrs. Patterson, the head administrator, with her perfectly coiffed gray hair, Mr. Davies, the maintenance supervisor, still wearing his work gloves, and several other caregivers whose names would soon be forgotten along with everything else about this place. But there's something unsettling about the photograph when you look closely. Really closely. Most of the children are laughing, their eyes bright with the kind of hope that only children can carry, even in the most difficult circumstances. They wear their best clothes, hand-me-downs that have been carefully pressed and mended, shoes that might be a size too big or too small but are polished to a shine nonetheless. Some children have their arms wrapped around each other's shoulders, creating chains of connection across the rows. All except one. In the back row, slightly separated from the others, stands a thin boy with dark hair that falls across his forehead in uneven bangs. While everyone else faces the camera directly, he's turned slightly to the side, as if he's listening to something only he can hear. His clothes are different too, not the typical donated clothing the other children wear, but something older, more worn, as if they've been passed down through generations rather than charity bins. But it's what he's holding that makes viewers pause when they finally notice it decades later. Clutched against his chest, almost protectively, is a small wind-up elephant. Not a modern toy, but something that looks handmade, crafted from worn fabric and metal parts that have been lovingly assembled by amateur hands. The elephant's trunk curves upward, and even in the black and white photograph, you can see the intricate stitching along its sides, the careful attention to detail that speaks of someone who put genuine love into its creation. The boy's name, according to the faded writing on the back of the photograph, is Eli Thornton. Age 7. No family listed. 3 weeks after this photograph was taken, Willow Creek Children's Home would close its doors forever. The official reason, stamped on documents filed with the county, was infrastructure failure. The building's heating system had broken down beyond repair, the plumbing was backing up into the basement, and the electrical wiring posed a fire hazard. The state had no choice but to shut it down immediately and relocate the children to other facilities throughout the region. Or so the story went. Mrs. Eleanor Vance, who had served as the home's primary social worker for 15 years, spent her final weeks there working frantically to ensure every child had a place to go. She made phone calls that stretched late into the night, filled out transfer paperwork in triplicate, and drove hundreds of miles shuttling children to their new homes. She was meticulous in her record-keeping, as she had always been. Every child was accounted for. Every placement was documented. Every loose end was tied up with the precision of someone who understood that these weren't just files, they were lives. But when investigators would eventually review those files 25 years later, they would discover something that should have been impossible. 22 children were successfully transferred. 22 placement records were complete and properly filed. 22 new addresses were documented with phone numbers for follow-up visits. The 23rd child, the quiet boy with the wind-up elephant, simply wasn't there. Eli Thornton's name appeared nowhere in the transfer documents. No foster family was listed for him. No group home placement was recorded. No forwarding address existed. It was as if, in the chaos of the closure, he had simply been overlooked, a clerical error that no one caught in time. But that seemed impossible. Mrs. Vance was nothing if not thorough. She had never, in her 15 years of service, lost track of a single child in her care. Her colleagues described her as obsessively organized, the kind of person who counted and recounted everything twice just to be sure. So where was Eli? The mystery might have remained buried forever if not for what happened to the photograph itself. Unlike most institutional records, which were filed away and forgotten, this particular image had been given to Sarah Chin, a young journalist who had written a feature story about the children's home for the local newspaper just months before its closure. Sarah had been moved by the children's stories, kids who had been abandoned, abused, or orphaned, but who still managed to find joy in small moments. She had planned to do a follow-up piece about their successful placements in new homes, a feel-good story about resilience and second chances. But when she called the county office 6 months later to get updates on the children, she was told that all records had been sealed due to privacy concerns. The children had moved on to new lives, she was informed, and it would be inappropriate to contact them for interviews. Sarah accepted this explanation at the time. She was young, and she trusted the system to do what was best for the children. She filed the photograph away in her personal collection and moved on to other stories. But she never forgot the quiet boy with the elephant. There had been something about him that day when she visited the home. While the other children had been eager to talk to her, to share their hopes and dreams for the future, Eli had remained silent. He had watched her from a distance, his elephant clutched tightly in his arms, those dark eyes following her movements with an intensity that was unsettling in someone so young. When she had finally approached him, crouching down to his level and asking his name, he had whispered something so quietly she had to lean in to hear him. "The elephant knows when it's time to go," he had said, his small fingers turning a tiny key on the toy's side. The elephant had begun to play a soft, tinkling melody, a lullaby she didn't recognize but that seemed achingly familiar nonetheless. "What does that mean?" she had asked, but Eli had just shrugged and walked away, the elephant's song trailing behind him like a ghost. Now, looking back at the photograph all these years later, Sarah would wonder if Eli had been trying to tell her something. If somehow, even at 7 years old, he had known what was coming. The wind-up elephant in the photograph seems to stare directly at the camera, its button eyes reflecting the flash in a way that makes them appear almost alive. And if you look very, very closely at the image, closer than anyone had reason to look for 25 years, you can just make out something scratched into the elephant's side. 2 words etched in careful, childish letters. "Still here." But in 1990, no one was looking that closely. No one thought to examine a child's toy for hidden messages. And so Eli Thornton, along with his elephant and whatever secret they shared, simply vanished from the official record. The children's home was boarded up the following spring. The red brick building stood empty, its windows dark, slowly being reclaimed by ivy and weather. Neighbors would sometimes comment on how quickly the place had fallen into disrepair, how sad it was to see such a solid building go to waste. But none of them thought to wonder about the quiet boy who had once lived there. None of them asked where he had gone, or whether he had gone anywhere at all. The photograph, meanwhile, remained safely tucked away in Sarah Chen's files, waiting for the day when someone would finally ask the right questions. When someone would look closely enough to see what had been hiding in plain sight all along. That day was still 25 years away. Gregory Ames never believed in ghosts until the night he heard one playing a lullaby in his basement. It was October 2015, exactly 25 years after the children's home had closed, though Gregory didn't know that detail yet. He had inherited the narrow Victorian house from his Aunt Millicent 3 months earlier, along with her entire collection of ceramic cats, her subscription to 14 different gardening magazines, and a basement that smelled like mothballs and forgotten dreams. The house sat directly adjacent to the old Willow Creek Children's Home, separated by nothing more than a chain-link fence that had long since been overtaken by honeysuckle vines. Gregory's aunt had lived there for 47 years, watching through her kitchen window as generations of children played in the home's backyard, their laughter drifting over the fence on summer afternoons. She had never married, never had children of her own, but she had always kept a bowl of candy by her front door and a swing hanging from the old oak tree that straddled the property line. The children from the home would sometimes climb the fence, strictly against the rules, to use the swing when the staff wasn't looking. Millicent pretended not to notice, just as she pretended not to see the small gifts that would appear on her porch, wildflower bouquets, hand-drawn pictures, and once, a carefully folded paper airplane with, "Thank you," written in crayon across its wings. Gregory had heard these stories from his aunt over the years, but they felt like fairy tales to him. He was a practical man, an accountant who lived in the city and drove a sensible sedan, and had never owned anything that couldn't be explained by logic and mathematics. He had taken the house reluctantly, mainly because selling it seemed too complicated and keeping it gave him an excuse to visit the small town where his mother had grown up. His plan was simple: spend a few weekends renovating the place, get it ready for the market, and move on with his life. The basement renovation was supposed to be the easiest part: just clean out the accumulated junk of 5 decades and maybe install some better lighting. He had been working alone that Tuesday night in October, sorting through boxes of his aunt's belongings by the light of a single bare bulb, when he first heard it. At exactly 11:17 p.m., according to the old clock on the basement workbench, a soft tinkling melody began to play somewhere inside the east wall. It was faint, barely audible above the hum of the ancient furnace, but unmistakably musical. A lullaby, played by what sounded like a wind-up music box. Gregory froze, a box of his aunt's Christmas decorations still in his hands. The melody played for perhaps 30 seconds, a haunting, repetitive tune that seemed to echo from somewhere deep within the wall itself, and then stopped as abruptly as it had begun. He waited in the silence that followed, his heart beating louder than seemed reasonable for a grown man afraid of a sound. After 5 minutes, he convinced himself it had been the old pipes settling, or perhaps a neighbor's radio carrying through the thin walls. Old houses made strange noises. Everyone knew that. But the next night, at exactly 11:17 p.m., it happened again. This time, Gregory was ready. He pressed his ear against the east wall, following the sound as it seemed to move from one section to another. The melody was clearer now, definitely a lullaby, definitely coming from inside the wall. And underneath the music, he could hear other sounds, soft thuds, like something small being moved around, and occasional metallic clicks, as if someone were winding up a toy. Over and over and over again. On the third night, Gregory brought a stethoscope he had borrowed from his neighbor, Dr. Martinez. He methodically worked his way along the wall, listening intently as 11:17 approached. When the music began, he pinpointed its location to a section of wall about 4 feet from the floor, directly behind his aunt's old sewing table. The wall felt solid when he knocked on it, but there was something different about the sound it made, not quite as hollow as he expected, but not solid either. As if there was something in between. That's when he noticed the wallpaper. The basement had been finished sometime in the 1960s, with wood paneling on most walls and flowered wallpaper on the east wall where the sound was coming from. But the wallpaper didn't quite match up. There was a section, about 6 feet wide and 8 feet tall, where the pattern was slightly off, as if it had been removed and replaced, but not by someone with an eye for detail. Gregory ran his fingers along the edges of this section and felt something that made his breath catch. The wallpaper wasn't adhered to wood paneling like the rest of the wall. Underneath, his fingertips found what felt like drywall, and beyond that, nothing at all. Empty space. The next morning, Gregory called the only person he could think of who might have answers, Marla Jessup, the local historian whose name he found in a stack of his aunt's correspondence. Millicent had apparently donated money to the Historical Society every year, and had maintained a friendly relationship with Marla for decades. When Gregory explained what he had been hearing, Marla was quiet for a long moment. "The children's home," she finally said. "Your aunt's house shares a wall with the old children's home. I always wondered." "Wondered what?" Another pause. "There were stories, after the place closed. People said they could hear children playing in the yard sometimes, even though the building was empty. Your aunt mentioned it once years ago. She said she thought some of the children might have stayed behind." "What do you mean, stayed behind?" "I'm not sure," Marla admitted. "But I think we need to take a closer look at that wall." "And Gregory? I think I know what that lullaby is. There was a boy who lived at the home right before it closed. He had a wind-up elephant that played that exact same song. Gregory felt something cold settle in his stomach. What happened to the boy? That's just it, Marla said quietly. Nobody knows. Marla Jessup arrived at Gregory's house the following evening carrying a leather satchel filled with newspaper clippings, architectural drawings, and a magnifying glass that had belonged to her grandfather. At 62, she had the sharp eyes of someone who had spent decades reading faded documents, and the careful manner of someone who understood that history often hid in the smallest details. I've been thinking about this all day, she said as Gregory led her down to the basement. I pulled the original blueprints for both buildings from the county archives. Your aunt's house was built in 1923, but the children's home wasn't constructed until 1932. When they built it, they had to work around the existing structure. She spread the yellowed architectural drawings across his aunt's old sewing table, pointing to the shared wall with her finger. Look here. The original plans show that this wall, the one where you're hearing the sounds, was supposed to be the exterior wall of your aunt's house. But when they built the children's home, they constructed it so close that there's only about 8 feet between the buildings. Gregory studied the drawings, trying to make sense of the maze of lines and measurements. So what's in that 8-foot space? According to these plans? Nothing. It should just be a gap between the buildings, maybe used for utilities. Marla's voice carried a note of uncertainty that made Gregory's skin prickle. But these blueprints are from 1932. A lot can change in 60 years. They waited until 11:17 p.m., sitting in folding chairs that Gregory had brought down from the kitchen. The basement felt different with another person there, less oppressive, but somehow more expectant, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. When the lullaby began, Marla's face went completely white. "Oh my God!" she whispered, pressing her hand to her mouth. I remember that song. My mother used to sing it to me when I was little. It's an old German lullaby, Brahms' lullaby, but there's another verse that most people don't know. The melody continued for its usual 30 seconds, followed by the soft thuds and metallic clicks. But tonight, with Marla listening intently, they heard something new, a sound so faint it was almost imagined, like someone taking a breath. Like someone sighing. The next morning, Marla called her friend Tom Bradley, a building inspector who owed her a favor from when she had helped him research the history of his own Victorian house. Tom arrived that afternoon with equipment Gregory had only seen on television, infrared cameras, ground-penetrating radar, and something called a borescope that could see through walls. This is highly irregular, Tom muttered as he set up his equipment. I should be calling the city, getting permits, following proper procedures. Tom, Marla said gently. What if there's someone in there who needs help? The infrared camera revealed what their ears had already told them. There was definitely empty space behind the wall, and it was significantly warmer than the surrounding areas. The ground-penetrating radar showed something even more disturbing. The space extended not just behind the east wall, but underneath Gregory's basement floor as well. This isn't just a gap between buildings, Tom said, studying his readings with growing concern. This is a room. A big room. And according to these thermal readings, there's been activity in there recently. That's when they called the police. Detective Sarah Martinez, no relation to Gregory's neighbor, arrived with 2 uniformed officers and a warrant that Tom had helped expedite through his connections at City Hall. She was a small woman with graying hair and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who had seen enough strange things in her 20-year career to keep an open mind. Before we open this wall, she said, I need to know exactly what you think we're going to find. Marla showed her the photographs from the children's home, including the final picture with Eli and his elephant. She explained about the missing transfer records, about the sounds that Gregory had been hearing, about the architectural inconsistencies. Detective Martinez studied the photograph for a long time, her expression growing more troubled with each detail Marla shared. You think there's a child in there? She asked finally. I think there might have been, Marla said carefully. 25 years ago. The detective nodded slowly. Then we do this right. Tom, I need you to make a small hole first. We go in slow and careful. Tom selected a drill bit and approached the wall where the wallpaper pattern didn't quite match. The drill bit went through the drywall easily, then hit something harder, wood planking. But after another inch, it broke through into empty space. The smell that emerged from the hole was indescribable. Not decay, exactly, but age. Dust and time, and something that might have been lavender soap, faded almost to nothing after decades. Tom inserted the borescope through the hole, its tiny camera sending images to a small monitor they had set up on the sewing table. For a moment, the screen showed only darkness. Then Tom adjusted the lighting, and they could see cribs. 7 small, white cribs arranged in a perfect row. Faded pastel colors on the walls, soft yellows and greens that had been carefully chosen to be cheerful and calming. Tiny shoes lined up underneath one crib, as if their owner had carefully placed them there before lying down. And on the floor, impossible but undeniable, something moved. A small wind-up elephant, its key turning gently, playing the same lullaby they had been hearing every night at 11:17. Detective Martinez stared at the monitor for a long moment, then looked up at Gregory and Marla with an expression that mixed professional composure with barely controlled shock. "We're going to need a bigger hole," she said. The hidden nursery revealed itself like a time capsule from another world. As Detective Martinez and her team carefully removed sections of the wall, each new detail felt more impossible than the last. The room was perfectly preserved, as if someone had simply closed the door one day and forgotten to come back. 7 white cribs, each one bearing the faded remnants of what had once been colorful bedding. The walls were painted in soft pastels that had survived decades of neglect with surprising grace. A mobile hung over one crib, its fabric animal still and silent now, but positioned as if they had been spinning gently just moments before. The wind-up elephant sat in the center of the room, its key still turning with mechanical precision. Every few minutes, it would play its haunting lullaby for exactly 30 seconds, then fall silent until some invisible timer told it to begin again. But it was Gregory who noticed the detail that would change everything. "There," he said, pointing to a small wooden dresser tucked into the corner of the room. "The bottom drawer is slightly open." Detective Martinez approached the dresser carefully, photographing everything before she touched it. The top was covered with the kinds of items you might expect in a nursery, small bottles that had once held baby powder, now empty and covered in dust, a hand mirror with a silver back that reflected nothing but shadows, and a small music box that matched the elephant's song when Martinez carefully wound its key. But the partially open drawer held something none of them had expected, a leather-bound ledger, its pages filled with careful handwriting in fading blue ink. Marla opened the ledger with reverent care, her historian's instincts taking over. The first page was dated January 15, 1990, and the handwriting was unmistakably that of someone who had been educated in an era when penmanship mattered. "Daily care log for East Wing residents," Marla read aloud. "Maintained by E. Langford, head caretaker." The entries that followed painted a picture of meticulous care and boundless devotion. Mrs. Langford, for it became clear that this was her personal log, separate from any official records, had documented every detail of the children's lives with the precision of someone who understood that these small moments mattered. January 15th, Tommy had trouble sleeping again. Made warm milk with honey. Eli shared his elephant music. All 7 settled by 10 p.m. January 22nd, Sarah's cough is better. Eli taught Michael how to wind the elephant. They take turns now. Beautiful to see them caring for each other. February 3rd, official notice came today. Home closing in 8 months. Cannot bear to tell the children yet. They are so happy here. Detective Martinez read over Marla's shoulder as she turned the pages. The entries continued chronologically through the months of 1990, each one a small window into the lives of 7 children whose names appeared again and again: Tommy, Sarah, Michael, Eli, Rebecca, James, and little Anna, who was apparently the youngest at only 4 years old. But as they progressed through the ledger, a disturbing pattern emerged. The official closure date of the children's home had been October 31st, 1990. But Mrs. Langford's entries continued well beyond that date. November 1st, the others have all gone to new homes. My 7 remain. I cannot abandon them. They trust me. Officials said they were difficult placements, but they are perfect children. Just need more time. November 15th, sealed off East Wing today. Told officials that section was too damaged to use. They accepted this explanation. We are safe here. December 25th, made Christmas special for them. Eli's elephant played carols when I wound it differently. The children believe it is magic. Perhaps it is. Gregory felt a chill that had nothing to do with the basement temperature. She kept them, he said quietly. After the home closed, she kept 7 children hidden in this room. The entries continued into 1991, documenting a secret world that existed parallel to the official closure. Mrs. Langford had apparently lived in the caretaker's apartment attached to the main building, coming through a hidden door to care for the children who couldn't be placed elsewhere. March 10, 1991, Anna spoke her first full sentence today. Mrs. L loves us. My heart is so full. These children are not difficult. They are treasures. June 22, 1991, supplies getting low. Found anonymous donations on back porch again. Neighbors must suspect something, but they do not interfere. Bless them. August 5, 1991, Eli grows more quiet each day. He speaks only to his elephant now. Whispers secrets I cannot hear. The other children understand somehow. They give him space. But then, abruptly, the handwriting changed. The careful script became shaky, uncertain. January 8, 1992, feeling poorly. Cannot climb stairs easily. Children are worried. Eli's elephant plays more often now, as if it knows. January 20, 1992, doctor says heart is weak. Cannot tell him about the children. Cannot risk their safety. Must find a way. The final entry was dated January 30, 1992, and it was barely legible. Children sleep peacefully. Eli's elephant watches over them. I have taught them to be very quiet during the day. They understand. They are good children. The best children. If something happens to me. The sentence was never finished. Detective Martinez carefully turned to the last page of the ledger, where someone had written 7 names in a child's careful handwriting. Next to 6 of the names, small check marks had been made in the same childish script. Tommy, Sarah. Michael, Rebecca, James, Anna, Eli. Only Eli's name remained unmarked. Marla's voice was barely a whisper when she finally spoke. She died in 1992. The children were left alone. Gregory stared at the wind-up elephant, which chose that moment to begin playing its lullaby again. But now the song sounded different, not cheerful or comforting, but infinitely sad. The check marks? Detective Martinez said, her professional composure finally cracking. What do you think they mean? None of them wanted to answer that question. But they all understood that they were no longer looking at just an abandoned room. They were looking at a tomb. And somehow, impossibly, Eli was still here, still winding his elephant, still playing his song every night at 11:17, the exact time, they would later discover, that Mrs. Langford had died 23 years ago. The investigation that followed would haunt Detective Martinez for the rest of her career. What they discovered in the weeks after opening the nursery wall was a story of love, loss, and a community's unconscious conspiracy of kindness that had sustained 7 forgotten children long after anyone knew they existed. Marla threw herself into the research with the dedication of someone who understood that these children deserved to have their story told completely and truthfully. She spent countless hours in the county records office, the library archives, and conducting interviews with anyone who had lived in the neighborhood during the early 1990s. What emerged was a picture of Eleanor Langford that was far more complex than anyone had imagined. At 68 years old when the children's home closed, she had been more than just a caretaker. She had been the heart of the institution. Other staff members came and went, but Mrs. Langford had been there for nearly 2 decades, watching over children who often had nowhere else to go. She never married, explained Dorothy Chen, Sarah Chen's mother, who had known Mrs. Langford from church. Always said the children were her family. When they announced the closure, she was devastated. kept saying there had to be another way. The official records showed that 22 children were successfully placed in new homes during the closure process. But Marla's investigation revealed what the paperwork couldn't capture. These 7 children were different. They were older, some with behavioral issues, others with medical conditions that made them difficult to place, as the social services euphemistically put it. Tommy had severe stuttering that made potential parents uncomfortable. Sarah had night terrors from trauma she couldn't articulate. Michael was partially deaf and required special schooling. Rebecca had developmental delays that meant she functioned more like a younger child. James had a club foot that would require expensive surgery. Anna, at 4 years old, still hadn't spoken a single word to anyone except Mrs. Langford. And Eli was simply too quiet, too strange, too attached to his wind-up elephant for most families to understand. Mrs. Langford knew what would happen to them. Marla explained to Gregory as they sat in his kitchen, surrounded by documents and interview notes. The older ones would be shuttled between group homes. The ones with special needs might end up in institutions. She couldn't bear it. So she had made an impossible choice. When the final transfer day arrived, she had hidden the 7 children in the east wing of the building, telling the social workers that they had already been moved to their new placements. She falsified the paperwork, created fictional foster families, and sealed off their section of the building. The deception might have been discovered immediately if not for a bureaucratic miracle. The case files were transferred to a new computer system that same week, and in the chaos of digitizing thousands of records, no one noticed that 7 placement addresses led to dead ends. But Mrs. Langford couldn't have sustained the children alone. That's where the neighbors came in, though most of them never realized what they were truly doing. "I used to leave food on the back porch of the children's home," admitted Frank Torres, who had lived across the street in 1991. "My wife would make extra casseroles, and I'd drop them off in the old donation box. We thought maybe Mrs. Langford was still there, cleaning up or something. The food was always gone the next day." Others had similar stories. Margaret Wendell had left bags of children's clothing. The Kowalski family had dropped off toys and books. Even after the building was officially empty, residents continued their quiet acts of charity, assuming someone official was collecting the items for distribution elsewhere. But it was Gregory's Aunt Millicent who had provided the most crucial help, though she had taken her secret to the grave. "Look at this," Marla said, showing Gregory a series of grocery receipts she had found in his aunt's papers. The receipts dated from 1991 and 1992, showing purchases of baby formula, children's medicine, and specific dietary items for managing various health conditions. More telling were the receipts from the hardware store: a small space heater, extra blankets, a battery-powered radio, and in December 1991, a small Christmas tree with decorations. "She knew," Gregory said, staring at his aunt's careful handwriting on the receipt margins, notes about dosages and feeding schedules. "She knew they were there, and she was helping Mrs. Langford take care of them." The trail of evidence painted a clear picture. Mrs. Langford had successfully hidden and cared for the 7 children for over a year after the home's closure. The community had unknowingly supported them through anonymous donations. Gregory's aunt had been secretly providing medical supplies and comfort items. But then Mrs. Langford died of a heart attack on January 30, 1992, at exactly 11:17 p.m. The children, the oldest of whom was only 10 years old, were left completely alone in their hidden nursery. They had been trained to be quiet during the day, to never leave their room, to trust only Mrs. Langford. When she didn't come back, they simply waited. The anonymous donations continued for 3 more years: casseroles left on porches, clothing placed in the old donation box, toys and supplies that disappeared overnight. The neighbors assumed someone was collecting them for charity. They never imagined that 7 children were surviving on these gifts, growing weaker and more desperate with each passing month. The final evidence came from the county maintenance records. In 1995, the basement window that had provided the hidden room's only source of fresh air was permanently bricked over during a renovation project. After that, the children would have had no way to survive. But according to the ledger they found, Eli had been different from the beginning. Even before Mrs. Langford died, he had seemed to understand something the others didn't. His elephant had played more frequently, as if counting down to something. He had grown quieter, more withdrawn, speaking only to his toy in whispers too soft for anyone else to hear. And on the night Mrs. Langford died, Eli's elephant had begun its nightly ritual, playing its lullaby every evening at 11:17, as if keeping time for something that was no longer quite alive, but not entirely gone either. The memorial service took place on a gray November morning, exactly 1 month after the discovery of the hidden nursery. The entire town seemed to gather on the small patch of grass between Gregory's house and the old children's home, their breath visible in the cold air as they listened to Mayor Patterson, no relation to the former administrator, speak about remembrance and responsibility. But it was Marla who truly honored the children's memory. She had spent the weeks following the discovery researching each child's life before they came to Willow Creek. Tommy Hendricks, who had stuttered because his father used to scream at him. Sarah Mills, whose night terrors came from watching her mother's boyfriend hurt her. Michael Santos, born deaf to parents who saw his condition as a punishment. Rebecca Wright, slowed to learn because no one had ever been patient enough to teach her. James Parker, abandoned because his disability made him imperfect. Anna Foster, who stopped speaking the day her grandmother died and left her with no one who understood her silence. And Eli Thornton, found wandering alone at age 3 with nothing but his handmade elephant, too young to even remember his own last name until Mrs. Langford gave him one from her favorite poet. "These were not difficult children," Marla said, her voice carrying clearly in the still air. "These were children who had been failed by a world that didn't know how to love them properly. Mrs. Langford understood what everyone else missed, that the children who need the most love are often the ones who know how to give it best." The memorial itself was simple but profound. A granite stone, paid for by donations from every household in the neighborhood, bore 7 names and a single inscription. "Still here in our hearts." Below the names, etched with careful precision, was the image of a small elephant. But the most remarkable part of the memorial was what happened to Eli's wind-up elephant itself. When the forensics team had finally finished documenting the hidden nursery, they found the elephant sitting motionless on the floor, its mechanism finally wound down after 25 years of keeping perfect time. Detective Martinez had carefully bagged it as evidence, but something had made her hesitate before sealing it away in the police storage facility. "I've seen a lot of strange things in this job," she told Gregory and Marla. "But I've never seen anything that felt so present. It's like that little toy was waiting for someone to finally pay attention." So instead of storage, the elephant was given to a local clockmaker named Samuel Chin, Sarah Chen's brother, who had inherited his family's shop and their talent for understanding the mysteries of mechanical things. Samuel spent 3 days carefully examining the elephant, documenting every gear, every spring, every carefully stitched seam. What he found defied explanation. The mechanism inside the elephant was far more complex than any toy should be. It wasn't just a simple music box. It was an intricate clockwork system that had somehow maintained perfect timing for decades without any external winding. More mysteriously, the elephant contained 7 tiny additional music boxes, each tuned to play a different lullaby. "It's as if someone designed it to remember," Samuel explained to the small crowd gathered for the memorial. "Each song is associated with one of the children. The elephant wasn't just Eli's toy. It was his way of keeping all of them alive." The decision about what to do with the elephant sparked the only real debate during the memorial planning. Some suggested it should be displayed in a museum. Others thought it should be buried with appropriate ceremony. But it was Gregory who provided the answer that felt right. "The hidden nursery should become what Mrs. Langford always intended it to be," he said. "A place where children are remembered and loved." So the space behind the wall was carefully preserved and converted into a small reflection room. The 7 cribs were restored and arranged exactly as they had been found. The pastel walls were gently cleaned but not repainted, allowing their faded beauty to speak to the passage of time. And in the center of the room, in a simple glass case, Eli's elephant was placed on a small wooden pedestal. But the elephant wasn't silent. Samuel had made one modification to its mechanism. Instead of playing automatically at 11:17 each night, the elephant now played only when someone pressed a small button on its base. Visitors could choose to hear the lullaby, to connect with the children's memory in a way that felt personal and intentional rather than haunting. The reflection room opened quietly, without fanfare. Word spread through the town not through official announcements, but through whispered recommendations, through parents bringing their own children to understand that love comes in many forms, through elderly residents who remembered seeing the children from Willow Creek playing in the yard decades ago. Marla's book, Still Here, The Children of Willow Creek, was published 8 months later by a small regional press. She donated all proceeds to fund programs for hard-to-place children, ensuring that what happened to Tommy, Sarah, Michael, Rebecca, James, Anna, and Eli would never happen again. The book's final chapter described something that continued to puzzle everyone involved in the discovery. Even after the memorial, even after the elephant was safely housed in its glass case, Gregory still heard sounds in his basement. Not the lullaby that had stopped the night they opened the wall. But sometimes, late at night, he heard what sounded like children whispering. Not frightening whispers, but the kind of quiet conversations children have when they're supposed to be sleeping. Gentle words of comfort, shared secrets, the soft sounds of caring for each other in the dark. Gregory never tried to investigate these sounds. Some mysteries, he had learned, were meant to be left alone. Some presences were not hauntings but blessings. And sometimes, when he passed the memorial stone on his way to work, he could swear he heard the faint sound of children laughing, not with the desperation of the forgotten, but with the joy of those who know they are finally, truly remembered. The wind-up elephant sits in its case today, waiting for the next visitor who needs to hear its song. And in the reflection room that was once a hidden nursery, 7 small cribs stand ready to remind the world that every child deserves to be loved, remembered, and never, ever forgotten again.